and welcome to this week's video where I show you how to remove or replace the elastic of your skirt, or how to place one if it doesn't have one already. Because especially in Lolita fashion, if you are buying older items, there is a chance that the elastic has broken. I have a friend who bought an OP second-hand, and the seller had shown very old photos where the elastic was still perfect, but when she received the dress, all of the elastic was broken so that it didn't return to the smaller size, and it was just awful, and she had to have it professionally, fixed, because it was, I think it was a full shearing JSK, so that was not fun. So sometimes if the skirt is older, the elastic can break, or in my case, the elastic when I bought the skirt was perfect size, but now that my waist is a teeny tiny bit bigger, it was too small. Like, I could close it, but I could feel the button screaming that it will fly off any minute, and it was just very uncomfortable, so I had to take it out. Or if it is a skirt that you bought and it has some shearing, but it's still too big on you, then it's easy to take the elastic out and put in a smaller elastic, or just open the seam and then cut some of the elastic and then re-sew it back together. And there are times if you buy a skirt that has a good waistband, but it doesn't have shearing and it is too big for you, then this is also how, or you can use this tutorial on how to open and close the waistband and place an elastic in there so that it will be smaller. If you are placing elastic when it didn't have already, I would suggest either half the waistband or a quarter of the waistband, because if you make the shearing like very small and the skirt is very big, then it can look weird when there is so much fabric bundled to a small space. So you want to take the extra effort to make preferably a third of the skirt sheared. One thing to take in consideration is that every skirt is built differently. For example, I did the same procedure to a skirt that I wore to HelloCon. It was a Baby the Starshine skirt and it was old, so the elastic had kind of died and I needed the extra room, so I did that to that skirt as well. I took the waistband open, and if you watch this tutorial you will see that when I opened this skirt, it took the whole waistband off so that I could put my hand through. But in the Baby the Starshine Bright skirt, when I opened the seam, it just opened the waistband so that one side of the waistband was still attached to the skirt. And you can't really tell how the waistband is built until you start taking it apart. So there can be surprises on how your waistband is built, but you really don't know until you open it up. And if you're unsure on how to put it back together, or if you can't finish the project in one go, then I suggest that when you're taking it apart, you take just a couple of photos so that you know what it looks like. In this tutorial I will show how I took the elastic out of this Fan Plus Friend steampunk themed skirt, and I will not be replacing it because it doesn't need it. It's perfect size without the elastic, but I will show you and talk you through on how and when you would add the elastic to the skirt. So the first thing you want to do is put the skirt on and make the shearing face your front, so the skirt is kind of backwards, and you want to take your measuring tape and measure from the side to the side seam of the skirt where the shearing ends. And now you have the measurement of how long you want the elastic to be, and you want to make it 2 or 3 centimeters smaller, depending on if you have half the skirt sheared or just a quarter, so that when you have the new elastic in, it will be a slightly snug fit so that it really stays in place, but you don't want to make it too short because then again it will be uncomfortable to wear. So you want to see how big or small you need the elastic to be. When choosing the elastic, you want it to be the same width as the elastic that is in your skirt, because if your new elastic is longer than the one in your skirt, then it may not fit through the tunnel where it's supposed to go, or if it's a lot smaller, then it can look just ugly. If the elastic that you have on your skirt is very wide and you only have very narrow elastic, then you might want to make an additional stitch in the middle of the tunnel so that you have 2 elastic tunnels, and then it's easier to use the thinner elastic. But basically in general you want the new elastic to be the same width as the old one. Here is a close-up of how the waistband looks before I take it apart. And here is what the underside looks like with the tag and the button clip and zipper. So as you can see, there is a stitch down the middle, and then we have a stitch at the bottom here. And what I'm going to do is start by taking apart this seam, and ideally you would use a seam ripper, but because I have lost all 3 of mine, because apparently that's how I roll, I'm gonna use scissors. And you want to take as small and sharp scissors as you can, not ones with the rounded edges or huge kitchen scissors, because then you're just going to rip your skirt apart. So I'm gonna go ahead and start from the lower seam, and I'll start right at the edge. So here we go. Now that I took the bottom seam apart a bit, it made a hole to the waistband from the lining as well as the front of the fabric, and I did that so that I gain access here. And I took this seam apart, but it was really hard to show because I had to really get this in my face. So once I took that apart and I took the bottom apart, I gained access to the center. And it's a bit hard to show, but I managed to dig the end of the elastic free. And this is now the seam that goes in the middle of the waistband, so that it really digs the elastic to the waistband and so that it doesn't move too much. So what we're going to do is start taking this seam apart so that we actually get the elastic from the waistband. And it's really hard to film the end because I have to pull all of these things and have the camera between me. So I'm gonna start to take it apart, and then once I get a bit down, I'll show you how it looks. This is my progress thus far. This is the side seam that I took apart, and as I'm taking the bottom seam apart, it detaches the waist belt from the lining and the front of the skirt. And if you want, you can first take the whole bottom seam and then take apart the middle seam, which holds the elastic. But I prefer to do it bit by bit and then returning to this one. And as you can see, here is the end of the elastic, and it's giving me already a lot more room. So what I'm going to do is continue taking the seams apart, first the lower seam and then the middle seam, and take the elastic out bit by bit. As you can see, I have already doubled the room by removing the elastic. And here is what the inside of the waistband looks like. And I am going to continue. And now I made it all the way to the end. So the whole back half has its waist band taken off, and it still has the ruffles because it had the elastic in it for so long. And here's the elastic. And once you've got it out, the next thing you want to do is clean up all the loose threads, so that once you start sewing it back together, you don't have a lot of loose threads, and it just makes it look a lot neater. And after that, you want to start sewing the waist back to the skirt. And depending on how your waistband is built, for example here, I would first do the lower seam so that I would leave small gaps at the ends, and once I've sewn most of the lower seam, I would then put the new elastic through it and then sew it to the side seams, and after that close the bottom seam. But depending again on how your skirt is built, it may be smarter for you to first replace the elastic and after that start sewing the bottom seam again. But you want to first clean up, and then depending on how your skirt is built, either start reassembling the skirt or first put in your new elastic. And if you don't put in new elastic, you might want to take either official supporting fabric or just take any random fabric that you have left over from a project and put it in the waist seam so that it really supports it to hold it up. If you have a wider waist belt, if you have a very narrow one, then you probably won't need one because it doesn't need that much support. And I'm going to start by cleaning up. Here I've started to sew the bottom seam so that I'm combining the skirts back to the waistband, and ideally you would like to iron down the waistband before you start doing this, but I'm lazy and I hate ironing, so I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna clean up as I go and start re-sewing the seam. And when you're sewing, you want to always keep the outside, the pretty side of the skirt facing you, so that when you're sewing it, you're not looking at the back side, because what's important is that the front side will look pretty, and you want to make the tiniest stitches possible so that you really get the nice outlook. And it will take a long time and you will hate it before it's over, but it really pays off, because if you do big sloppy stitches you can see it. So just put on a good movie and start stitching. Slowly making my way across the seam, and if you are using support fabric, remember to keep checking that you are sewing on it both at the bottom and, if you want, in the middle. And if you're putting in elastic and you only sew it from the ends, which is the handiest way, make sure that you are not sewing into the elastic. And I decided not to go with support fabric because the front side of the skirt doesn't have any, so I want them to match each other. And because I don't need an elastic, I won't be putting in elastic. But if you are putting either of those, remember to keep checking on them every couple centimeters when you are sewing the skirt. And I finished sewing all the way back to the front of the skirt and remade the final stitches, and that is the skirt done. And this is how the waistband looks after I've taken the elastic out. It's still a bit wrinkly because I haven't ironed it, because I absolutely despise ironing anything. And here are the stitches that I made. Excuse the cat here. And here is the inside. So it's given me a lot more room to the skirt, and this is the finished product. And that was it for this week's video. I hope it was informative, and if you have any questions regarding the tutorial, please feel free to leave them down below, and I will see you again on the next video.